If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. You are listening to the Maura Murray series. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. This is episode 85, Extreme Assumptions. Obviously, this is one of the rare cases. You really don't see this in too many other cases where you have these gigantic house of cards built on assumptions. So it's just stacks of assumptions on top of assumptions, and then people pretending they're not assumptions and moving from trying to stand on top of this house of cards to try to solve the case, which is obviously not going to work. So on Mindshock, of course, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure, and we attempt not to fall for any of these silly logical fallacies like so many other people. So we will objectively, logically, and neutrally dissect all of the theories in all cases, including the Maura Murray case. Are we closer than ever before to solving this with the influx of new information that we will be going over, as well as looking back at some of these extreme assumptions and figuring out that maybe those assumptions shouldn't have been made, and get everyone further and further off track from the real truth of what really happened to Maura Murray. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, find it interesting and informative, want to keep up awareness in this unsolved missing persons cold case, as well as many others, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So we have quite a lot to go over. And let's go all the way back to the art gallery, because everybody always talks about Maura Murray's security desk job, but the art gallery has kind of been left by the wayside, and there's an interesting post here on Maura Murray sub, still a relatively controlled subreddit, still a lot of goofs there, like so-called folk, which we've gone over in the past. Again, possibly individuals with mental disabilities are highly attracted to this case. And, obviously they're not going to be able to process information even at a basic level. So interacting with them is more of a fool's errand. But there are some solid posters over on Maura Murray's sub as well. It's not quite as bad as the so-called official subreddit, which is just, the biggest sham possible, completely useless. So Dodgers fan posted this: why is the art gallery so trivial relative to Maura's classes, nursing clinicals, and dorm security? First pick citing a local gallery, Daily Collegian 2006. Picks 2 and 3 are the same Tumblr archive, but one states a local art gallery from Conway. The other writes UMass art gallery. Really? Question mark. So is this a case of simply them not knowing exactly which art gallery? But why is it so difficult to even figure out the art gallery? Because even James Renner stated he had trouble tracking this down. I mean, why would it be so difficult to track this down? Now, if there is some kind of widespread conspiracy in play, and I'm not saying there is for all those coincidence theorists who have some severe mental deficiencies and trouble with comprehending basic English, if there's some kind of widespread conspiracy and it has something to do with the art gallery, obviously they would want to put the kibosh on anybody looking into the art gallery. If the art gallery truly is critical, whether regarding the owner who happened to have a red truck and gave people rides, or other individuals connected to the art gallery, possibly Sarah Alfieri, it's obviously they would want to cover that up and prevent people from looking into it and focus the attention elsewhere. So is this by design, or is this simply people not able to track it down for other reasons? Some responses here. Grand Tradition posted this: according to episode 12 of Missing Maura Murray, Strelzin's office stated quite categorically that Maura didn't, in fact, email her work bosses to say that she would be gone for the week. So it's not clear where this information came from that she did. And another thing that's weird, of course, in this gigantic assumption stack someone using Maura's email might have sent out emails. That doesn't mean Maura did. Again, when you're assuming and then building upon the assumptions, you could be getting farther and farther and farther away from the truth. So some responses here. Maura emailed her nursing faculty and her art gallery boss at 1:24 p.m. on February 9th. I have about 30 sources on that I could provide. There is one source that explicitly states they were separate emails. However, that source could be incorrect, and it could have been one email, likely CC'd, to the art gallery boss. Below is a transcript I did of Missing Maura Murray 27 a few years ago. Strelzin's office confirms that she sent an email but doesn't give a time. Okay, the response here by Grand Tradition. Strelzin gave a clear answer on whether Maura informed her bosses she would be absent for a week. Quote, we said, did Maura notify either of her bosses that she would be absent for the week? And they said, no, she did not. I mean, this is quite interesting. Because, again, all of the gullible goofs, the Dunning-Kruger crowd that hovers around this case, they've extrapolated all of this from all of these assumptions. Maura did this, Maura did that. And do we even have irrefutable proof that an email was sent from her account by anyone? So, continuing on with Grand Tradition's post here, Strelzin's office took their time responding to Tim and Lance's questions, presumably to make sure of the accuracy of their answers. So in my opinion, the above quote is probably definitive. If you say, though, there are a lot of other quotes which claim the art gallery boss was informed, it would be interesting to track back those sources to see where they originally got their information from and work out why it is different from Strelzin's answer above. Okay, there's a couple issues here because Strelzin's office could be telling the truth if UMass lied to them and stated there were no such emails, even if they were. And depending on which stage of the investigation this was all done, the answers could change. Again, that's neither here nor there. That's why we do not engage in false dichotomy logical fallacies. Many different possibilities here. Also, is it possible some of these journalists writing these articles, was there confusion between Maura emailing her work bosses and her professors, and that language got mixed up? Did she email professors and not her work bosses, and that all got conflated and mixed up? And again, astute online researchers following the case for a very long time point to the issue on why she did not email the UMass Police Department regarding her security desk job. Because, again, allegedly, all these sources say she emailed her professors and possibly also the art gallery boss. But apparently she did not email UMPD. There's no trace of that even alleged, supposedly. Another post from an astute researcher here. If those emails were in fact Maura, then I wonder if she was let go of her UMPD security job and Karen escorted her away per protocol, making her disappearance and breakdown a stress factor. Or if someone else sent emails about being out for a week to buy time from the crime. Then those persons forgot or didn't realize she still worked there after her credit card arrest months earlier. Or a last option, no matter who sent the emails, did not want UMPD on alert so quickly. They even made Karen Mayotte come in to make a statement after the Saturn was located. And of course, this statement is kept under lock and key. It's getting the Area 51 treatment for some reason. Obviously, we don't know why. Also interesting to point out, if someone was trying to buy time, or if it was someone removed enough that they were not aware that Maura, again, either still worked at the job, if she was fired that Thursday night. We've gone over that theory a few times as well. It's a pretty solid theory, certainly better than some of the other ones. Again, I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. It's an unknown variable. Obviously, that police report would certainly shed some light on the issue, or at least what Karen alleges happened that night. We would at least have that amount of information, regardless of whether it would be true or not, but it could then be dissected from there. So, another astute poster here, I mean, there's so many details in this case, reminding us the tutoring session on Tuesday was also not canceled. That and her alarm clock going off does make one wonder if there was someone who didn't realize these things existed. Excellent point there. Excellent point. Because that's another curiosity, because even if somebody was, let's say it's somebody from UMPD, so they full well know Maura's not coming back, either because she was fired or they did something to her or whatever. So if they're sending these emails, there's no need to email UMPD if they're covering up whatever. But they might not know about this tutoring session. That, in my opinion, might possibly be a smoking gun into figuring out what happened. Now, the alarm clock I'm not sure about. And then also, the amount of time she even spent in her dorm room is also highly suspect. Supposedly, she spent a lot of time possibly at the Phillip Street address or in that general vicinity at another address. Persons connected to Sarah Alfieri and members of the track team also congregated in that area. I mean, there's some overlap. We went over the population size of UMass. It is absolutely gigantic. Statistically, it'd be quite a coincidence. It's not like track is the only women's track is the only sports team at UMass. UMass is a pretty big sports team, sports school. They have a lot of different sports, and they have tons of non-athletes as well. So statistically, it's quite coincidental that all these overlaps are occurring. Another interesting post here. She could have swapped shifts with a coworker, and that way she wouldn't have to tell her boss why she was going to be gone. People can swap shifts for any reason. I worked on campus at a university in New York, and my boss never asked us why we swapped shifts. I often swapped for social reasons like a concert. She just thanked us for being on top of things. Also, another one of these coinkydinks is none other than Erin Larkin, also on the track team and also having this security desk job at UMass. Perhaps she knows more than she has said. And with the moniker Gorilla Ontologist, one can only wonder. Again, if you haven't checked out the dozens and dozens of Mindshock episodes in this series, make sure you check them out, because we go over Erin Larkin, we go over all of these aspects of the case, and they are quite difficult to keep up with. I mean, this case has some of the most insane, deepest, and multitude of rabbit holes than any other case out there. So, Golden Mom posted here. Now, this is an individual possibly suffering quite severely from the Dunning-Kruger effect, but here's another source on the email to the art gallery boss. This is the Missing Maura Murray episode with the student who worked with Maura at the art gallery, allegedly. Again, I don't know how they proved that. She mentions that the boss, John, received one of the emails. This is at minute 27. So I'm not really going to keep discussing this. I consider it confirmed. So again, you have these gullible Dunning-Kruger individuals who take on blind faith the word of someone who may not even have worked there. I mean, how is this confirmed? But let's say it was confirmed. It's still their word. The words of humans is by no means confirmed, because again, I don't know why this is so difficult for some people to understand. Humans are fallible. They could either be mistaken, memories are not perfect, or they could be lying or covering something up, either for a good reason or a bad reason. Not necessarily that they're evil and trying to do something bad. They could have a very good reason for saying what they're saying, even if they know it's not the truth. Or they believe it's the truth, but it's actually not. I mean, these are very simple concepts, but again, the Maura Murray case seems to have a lot of Dunning-Kruger goofs hovering around it. So the response here by Grand Tradition, yes, I noticed that too. She seemed very sure that the email came up in conversation with her boss at the art gallery. She's trying to remember a conversation from over 10 years before the interview was given, though. In my opinion, the source from Strelzin's office can't be so readily dismissed. It is the only source mentioned in our discussion which actually has access to the evidence file. And of course, Golden Mom did not respond to that comment. I mean, it's weird. Like, why would anybody take anybody's human's words on blind faith, especially when it's over something that happened so long ago? And she's saying it came up in conversation with the art gallery boss. So let's say that's true. Let's say the art gallery boss did mention an email. That still doesn't mean an email was sent. Because again, if the art gallery boss is involved, or he heard from someone else, let's say UMass told him there were a bunch of emails sent, and he happened not to get it, but he just assumed they were sent, he would probably mention that they were sent. So again, there's many different scenarios where people are not lying, but it's still not the truth. It's simply not the truth. So again, that's why this episode exists, because these extreme assumptions that people just build these religious blind faith temples on top of it and then try to solve the case from there, that's obviously not going to work if the assumption is false. Betty Cracker here posted this. I know this isn't your topic, but I find the sentence at the bottom very odd. Quote, friends and family described her as a quiet woman who didn't mingle much with classmates, end quote. Considering that she used to go to dorm parties, had friends and romantic relationships on campus, was an athlete, etc., not to mention multiple jobs, when I was at UMass, I would have described myself like that sentence. Compared to someone who is typically shy, she sounds very social. Just looking at it as an outsider, though, I'm sure it's not relevant to any part of the case. I'm not necessarily sure about that. Again, I'm not sure about anything, because if there's some kind of vast cover-up to make Maura seem one way versus the other, and it's all part of the cover-up, I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying it is. People get triggered so quickly. I'm not saying it is, but if it is, that would obviously point to different things than if it's not. Response here by Never Pedestrian. I thought that too. She seemed outgoing and spirited to me. Got involved in teams, track, had other jobs, and plenty of friends and acquaintances. As one pal said, was a great dancer who boys definitely noticed. This is weird too. Thunder Rain posted this. There's a video clip they showed sometimes where Maura is walking down steps and she's just seemed so confident, arrogant almost. I find it really hard to believe Maura was shy and quiet, and yet a few people have said it's true. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I wouldn't use arrogant to describe her in any way, but yeah, she did look confident, outgoing, relatively happy, at least in older photographs. Again, we don't know the situation in the months prior. If there was something weird going on, going back to that credit card situation, which a lot of people don't find it suspicious that police are going to run some kind of highly expensive sting operation over a 2-digit credit card charge, which may or may not have been fraudulent. Like, how do they prove that that person didn't say that it was a pass-around credit card, then changed her mind if there was some kind of, again, mean girls situation in college, possibly love triangles or otherwise, jealousy, whatever. Or if a third party told Maura it was a pass-around card, so she thought it was to use it, and the owner of the card is saying it's not. How would Maura know that if she was told by another individual? So was she set up there? Again, we don't really know any of it, but all these goofs just take it on blind faith as gospel that Maura somehow intentionally did that. It's so weird. I mean, these are basics. These are children-level basics. But then again, I guess this podcast wouldn't exist if there weren't that many goofy people out there. So here's an article we did not go over yet. This was posted by Pearl Jelly. I agree with what you and Pedestrian are saying. She's described as mostly shy and reserved, but when she seems social, etc. in other ways. Like you've both said, it was probably dependent on who she was with, who she felt closer to. I've been reading old newspaper clips and found this one from The Recorder, dated February 18th, 2004. I'll copy-paste some of it below. It gives insight into what you're both saying and how Maura was with dorm mates. On a side note, I don't know if it's been cleared up or not, if Maura was still on the track team the spring semester, but it doesn't sound like it. And that's another thing, too. I mean, before I go into this excerpt, I'm just going to reiterate again. In the Maura Murray case, nearly everything is impossible to verify definitively. Like, no matter where you look, whether it's something track team related, art gallery related, I mean, no matter where you look, Billy Roush, his travel schedule, I mean, no matter where you look, it's like nothing can be definitively verified. Is that by design? But here's the excerpt here from The Recorder, February 18, 2004. Those who know Maura Murray at UMass describe her as a quiet woman who kept to herself, enjoyed running, and was a good student who made the dean's list for the last 2 semesters. She was quiet, said Amy Flynn, a junior student who lived 2 doors down from Murray last year at Kennedy Hall. Both girls still live in Kennedy Hall, but not on the same floor. She didn't hang out with the girls on the floor, Flynn said. She came by a few times. She was nice. I remember she ran a lot, and she worked out. So hold on a second. If she constantly saw her running all the time, is that story about a knee injury not true? Or was it true, but it was just a really short injury and it didn't bother her anymore? Again, nothing, it's impossible, like nothing can be verified. It's impossible to track anything down here. But continuing the article here. So, I never saw her with any friends, only her boyfriend. But she barely saw her in general, so that statement doesn't hold that much weight. So only her boyfriend when he came out to visit. So now we have verification. Billy Roush did in fact come out to visit. I would at least once, right? She's saying when he came out to visit. That kind of makes it sound like it was more than one time. But let's continue on here. We probably talked to her the most of anyone on our floor, Flynn said. The only thing I know about her, she was always running or working out. Let me say that again. She was always running or working out. She always said hello. She was quiet, a nice girl, really. End quote. Continuing the article, though, UMass women's track and head coach Julie Lafreniere said Murray trained with the team last year but didn't compete. This year, she's not on the track team, although she is still friendly with some of her old team members. Lafreniere said they're all worried about her. It's a very scary thing. I just hope she's okay. Let me repeat that last part, because a lot of people are, for some reason, again, making these assumptions that Maura had nothing to do with any of the track team members again. Here it clearly states she is still friendly with some of her old team members. I mean, we can probably conclude that Kate Markopoulos was one of them. Now, apparently, there's another one that was one of the last numbers she called, if not, who may have been the Londonderry Ping, and also in the Phillip Street area, who she may have actually stayed with. Again, all unverified rumors. Nothing is possible to verify here. I'm not alleging anything is true or untrue, but these statements are curious from those that even claim that she wasn't even friends with Kate Markopoulos at all. I mean, there's a lot of goofs out there. But that's pretty curious. So she's still hanging out with her former track team members. The injury, I mean, how severe could the injury be if people are saying she's always running and working out and she's even training with the track team? So was it just like a temporary injury that maybe prevented her from doing a couple meets? And possibly this particular year, it's mostly she has a busy schedule and not a knee injury. And which track mates exactly is she hanging out with? Is it also Erin Larkin? I mean, Erin Larkin said Kate Markopoulos was her big sister. So what does all that mean? And then apparently there's other track team members that are on her phone bill and also possibly either the same one or a different one hanging out in the Phillip Street area where Maura may even possibly be staying more often than her dorm room. An interesting post here. Not sure what you mean by trivial. While some question whether Maura Murray showed up for work Sunday, I think that it is reasonably well established that she did. How so, though? I mean, I haven't seen any evidence of that other than the words of a couple of humans. You would think that there were security cameras in common areas. You would think there would be some either inside the art gallery itself or at least in the lobby area, etc., parking lot area. So that could all be definitively verified, yet none of that has been provided. Just like whether the Saturn was even on campus for that week or even the month. I mean, no way to know that without evidence. Some suspicion was focused on the gallery manager as an acquaintance of Maura Murray's, but that didn't seem to amount to much. Well, supposedly he had a red truck and did give some of the the female employees rides home in his red truck. Some of them described him as creepy, supposedly. Again, doesn't really mean anything, but that doesn't seem to not amount to much. Potentially, it could amount to something. Of mild interest, Sarah Alfieri was a co-worker at the gallery. Alfieri described Maura Murray as being normal on Sunday and offered that Maura did not mention having wrecked Fred's car. I just find almost everything with the enigma that is Sarah Alfieri odd. I mean, you could throw a lot of oddballs in the mix here. Erin Larkin, Bill Roush. I mean, there's a never-ending stream of oddballs. Dodgers fan posted this. Why is local art gallery being convoluted with UMass school art gallery across numerous sources? A response here, just like she was on the track roster, she wasn't. Nothing can be verified. Okay, so Hampton Art Gallery is located on the UMass campus, so could that be the reason for the confusion? Another poster posted this. I remember very early on Renner's blog, he described having a very difficult time trying to track down which art gallery she worked at. Why would it have been so hard to track down? Another interesting point presented here by Shades of Purple, which definitely should be tracked down. On the last picture, it is confirmed Maura and Fred made plans to talk 8 p.m. on Monday. Did he reach her? Did he try to reach her at any point? I don't think Fred was involved by any means, just wondering if that was typical for them. My kids are young, but as a parent, I would think that if my daughter away at college was supposed to call me a specific night and I didn't hear from her, I would be blowing up her phone until we connected, especially after an accident, knowing she was upset. Well, here's the thing, too. 2004 was a very different time. So people weren't as glued to their devices and in contact every second. So even if he might have been thinking, oh, there would have to be a phone call, I mean, you would think he would call, though. So is there definitive confirmation that he reached out and tried to call? Because even, it's 8 o'clock, whatever. She got held up somewhere. She had to, maybe he thought she had to pick up an extra shift or whatever, didn't get a chance to call him and would just call the next day. I mean, if that was usual. So if they had scheduled calls before and she didn't get back until the following day, in 2004, that probably wasn't the biggest deal. But again, that's dependent on the individuals here. So obviously, Fred Murray could clear that up. So let's move on to some more assumptions. The Hadley accident, the cadet, and the 3 guys at the party, a new twist perhaps. This was posted on the Maura Murray Mindshock subreddit by Lively Mamu. And some interesting points here. A new twist, perhaps. What if the phone was left behind on purpose? And of course, that's just another one of the many things that can't be tracked down or verified. Exactly when Maura got her phone back. Exactly where she left it when. I mean, and if she got it back at all. So what if the phone was left behind on purpose and the 3 guys from the party were at the Hadley accident scene as spotters? Phone is left behind to make sure there's no location history of Maura post-party. She leaves the party with guy number 1. It's 3:30 a.m. and few cars are passing by, but just to make sure the staging goes well, guy number 2 and guy number 3 also leave shortly after Maura and guy number 1. They have their own cars. One is the cadet. They all leave separately to avoid having witnesses see them leave together. They all meet up somewhere not far from the accident scene, then they split up again. Guy number 1 heads towards and parks on North Maple to see if cars are coming from other side, turns on emergency flashers to avoid causing an accident. Guy number 2, the cadet, gets in the Corolla while Maura disembarks from it. Maura gets in the car of guy number 3 and they follow the Corolla. They stay way behind the Corolla and make sure no cars are following behind them. Guy number 1 signals to guy number 3, the one with Maura, that the coast is clear on Maple. If guy number 3, with Maura, also confirms that no cars are heading toward them in the direction of the T intersection on Hadley and Maple, then it's a go, and guy number 2, the cadet alone in the Corolla, heads towards the T intersection. Guy number 3, with Maura, follows behind the cadet, and the cadet crashes the Corolla. So cadet is guy number 2 in this scenario. Maura disembarks car of guy number 3 and joins the cadet outside the Corolla. Guy number 1 and guy number 3 leave the scene. Assuming there was a witness who saw guy number 1 stopped on Maple, and assuming they eventually learned of Maura's accident, they might dismiss him as having stopped out of curiosity to offer help. His flashers were on, remember. Also, any witness who would have arrived after the crash, since guy number 1 made sure the coast was clear prior to putting the plan into action. Same thing for any witness who might have seen Maura in the car with guy number 3. Witness might assume she went to ask for help, although it's possible that a car came upon the accident scene in the few seconds before Maura got out of car number 3. At that time of morning, it would be highly improbable, since they made sure beforehand that no cars were following. I suggested that the cadet was responsible for the crash because I assume he might have had training in dangerous driving, for lack of a better word. If he's training to be a policeman, isn't it part of training for high-speed chases, for example? Does anyone know? Nevertheless, I don't think it's necessary that it be someone with such training for this scenario to work. So, yes, I don't know if this happened exactly like this, or even... I mean, one theory is that Maura was driven off the road and someone tried to get her that night. But either if the cadet was a good guy and he stumbled upon the scene, or he was a bad guy and other people stumbled upon the scene, we don't know. I mean, there's missing time from between the party and the accident scene, just like at the stage. If this one was also staged, like the one in Haverhill, which was concluded to be staged by multiple independent accident reconstruction experts, and also obviously looks staged. So it's weird. It's really weird. None of these things add up, of course. And so regardless of whether she was driven off the road or not, what maybe there was a plan to take her, then that plan went wrong. So then she got into the tow truck driver, taken to the hotel with her dad. Or it could have been a different scenario like this one. Again, I'm not saying there's clear evidence for any of this. There doesn't seem to be clear evidence for anything, for any theory. Another post here, Maura, in my opinion, needed the Toyota for some other reason than just going to a dorm party that she could walk to. Either there was another party off campus too far to walk to in the winter, or somebody like the cadet who lived off campus that she wanted to visit. Coincidentally, there was a cadet who lived not far from there. I don't think she was dropping the Toyota off with her dad in the middle of the night. She knew he would be asleep. A response here, I think it's possible, having raised two girls, that they dropped off Fred, maybe tired and had some drinks, in order to borrow his newer car, without him knowing to drive to a party somewhere. Either not at Sarah Alfieri's or to go there after. When he would wake up the next morning, Maura and his car would be there, and maybe he wouldn't have a clue. Of course, the accident threw a monkey wrench into all of that. I mean, that's a very plausible scenario. Another post here, UMass cadets don't do any training in any vehicles. They walk all their area and escorted employees and students and report matters to fully trained campus police. Their role is important as eyes and ears on campus, but most of their duties don't rise above much else here. After completing their course, they can later go on to becoming actual officers. Another post, so when the cadet was reported as standing by on the Hadley PD report, wouldn't he have just been a civilian or pedestrian off duty at that hour in Hadley? I mean, I can't imagine he'd still be wearing his uniform, or whatever cadets wore on duty at UMass. If cadet duties are limited to being eyes and ears, the intersection in Hadley, I'll bet close to UMass, wouldn't be part of their duties being off campus. A response, either way, the cadet had to call a proper officer to the scene, in which he or she did do, and it was acknowledged by UMPD. I feel that it's been hidden because of extenuating circumstances on why that it had to be quiet, which include many types of unbecoming scenarios as well. These UMass cadets were students, and maybe this person was partying with others or whatnot here. That's interesting. A response, I think it is very possible and perhaps the reason Maura wasn't given a sobriety test that night. Perhaps Hadley law enforcement knew the cadet had been drinking and driving as well that night, but didn't want to ruin his or her career, so Hadley PD chalked it up as a motor vehicle accident, cleared the scene, and moved on. Curious. So let's move on to another post here on the Maura Murray sub by Miss Gags, sharing an old interview from April 14th, 2004 with Child Seek Network and Bill Rausch. Now, we actually did go over this in the earlier episodes, but let's do it again, and there's some interesting comments and possible revelations here. On February 9, 2004, Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the UMass University of Massachusetts Amherst, vanished in the northern New Hampshire wilderness. She had a minor car accident, and in the 10 minutes it took police to respond, she was gone. Police searched the area for days, but found no obvious clues. There were no footprints, and a search dog lost the scent on the road just yards from her car. Her bank card, credit cards, and cell phone have not been used since. Bill Rausch, who was a second lieutenant in the Army and also Maura's boyfriend, flew from Oklahoma, where he's stationed, to help search for her. Bill is pictured above with Maura. He has since gone back to Oklahoma, where he did an online interview with the Child Seek Network. Below is that interview. Bill, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Maura? I met Maura through an introduction by her sister, Julie, in the fall of 2001, while we were cadets at the United States Military Academy. We were drawn to one another almost immediately and have been dating ever since. Well on her way to successfully completing the nursing program at UMass Amherst, we had planned to become engaged. The specific date was to be a surprise within the year, and married sometime after she had graduated in the spring of 2005. Now, there's a lot of, I mean, I don't know how far I want to dissect some of these statements, because supposedly he met Maura when he was assigned to be her mentor for various reasons, honor code violations, supposedly. So, a lot of issues there. Okay, question. Most of the news reports say that Maura is a very responsible young lady, yet evidence suggests that she was planning on leaving school and going away somewhere without telling her family and friends. Do you think that the pressure of nursing school and life in general would drive Maura to leave without telling anyone? Answer. Although no one can speak for Maura, I can say that she was not only enjoying her current semester, which she expressed to me on several occasions, but also was excelling at the same time based on her Dean's List performance during the fall semester. Well, that was the fall semester. In regard to her leaving without mention to anyone, I can say with absolute certainty that she attempted to tell me via phone, but instead left a message expressing her desire to talk with me. The voicemail I am referring to was left at 1 p.m. on Monday, February 9th, the day that she left. And based on our phone records, we have a joint account, the last 2 phone calls she made prior to her disappearance were to myself at the time mentioned above and to her dorm phone, which, based on the duration, was to check her messages, presumably to see if I had called. Question. The area where Maura had her accident, allegedly, and where she was last seen, allegedly, was not searched for 2 days. What reason do law enforcement officials give for the delay in searching? Answer. The explanation from law enforcement officials in regard to the time between the car being found and the search being conducted was based on the fact that they were uncertain as to the severity of the issue, and in addition were awaiting contact from the owner-operator of the car. Sure they were. Question. Some news stories suggest that Maura had some trouble at school. Do you think that this alleged trouble had anything to do with her going missing? Answer. Based on the fact that we talked daily via phone, email, and written letters, I was not aware of any major issues that she was dealing with at school. And although I am curious as to why she left school, it goes without saying that my primary concern right now is in bringing her home safely and as quickly as possible. Again, he obviously neglects to mention that Maura might have been seeing somebody else, per se. She may have even broken up with him. We have none of this information. Question. It has been reported that one of Maura's friends held back information from the police because she did not want to get Maura in trouble. Has this person since given that information to them? Answer. Although I cannot accurately comment on any information that the police did or did not receive from her friend in question, I mean, what a politician, I can say that I have spoken with her on numerous occasions immediately following Maura's disappearance, and since, feeling quite certain that she was forthcoming to authorities as well as myself. That's funny. Question. Have law enforcement officials given you any idea of when they will consider that foul play may be involved instead of treating Maura's disappearance as voluntary? Answer. Although the police were quite adamant that Maura's disappearance was of her own accord initially, I can only hope that law enforcement officials are coming to the most obvious conclusion that they were most certainly wrong in that assumption. With that being said, I know that they have yet to officially categorize Maura's case as a criminal investigation based on a lack of evidence which provoke a change of status. In regard to any such evidence, I am hoping that it was not overlooked, discarded, or destroyed during the initial stages of the investigation while the authorities were mistakenly treating the situation as a missing persons case. For example, the car in which Maura was driving at the time of the accident was released by the authorities within 4 days and had never been checked for fingerprints. So that's a major comment there that we're going to go back to as well. Question. There have been several young ladies disappear recently. Some get lots of national media coverage while some do not. Does it anger you that Maura has not gotten the same attention as others? Answer. Maura's entire family as well as her countless friends and myself want to bring Maura home as soon as possible. We are also aware that any and all media coverage would be helpful in doing precisely that. At the same time, we cannot be upset at a lack of coverage Maura is receiving or at the abundance of coverage in other cases receiving. Ideally, situations such as this would be picked up by all media outlets. However, in Maura's case, I believe that the authorities' unwillingness to admit their incorrect assumption of her disappearing of her own accord, as well as any further action to categorize this as a criminal investigation, has left the media wary to run the story. I think it logical to assume that no media source wants to run a story involving plausible criminal activity only to find out that the opposite was in fact the case. And as long as the authorities refuse to accept the obvious and in turn publicize the facts of the case, I feel that the media will continually be hesitant to run with the story. Yeah, you can really tell this guy's being trained in psychological operations. Question. The family has hired a PI to help find Maura. Have you considered other options such as psychics? Answer. To involve additional assistance such as a psychic, I personally cannot fathom how that could be of help. Question: have any of the national news media programs such as the Today Show, Good Morning America, etc. contacted you about putting Maura's story on? Have you contacted any of them about that possibility? Answer: Maura's family, as well as my own family, have been in contact as well as communication. What's the difference between contact and communication? With several national news media programs. Some programs have run the story, to which everyone involved is both thankful and appreciative for their interest and in turn helping bring Maura home. Other programs that we have been in contact with who have not run the story are concerned with the point I previously mentioned, that being the authorities' reluctance of officially categorizing Maura's case as a criminal investigation, as well as standing by their initial and at this point obvious incorrect assumption that she disappeared willingly. This is a concern for the media outlets, and rightfully so, given that they rely on all sources of information when deciding to run a case. Again, this is why we feel it is so important for the authorities to issue a new statement explaining the severity of the case. Is there anything that ChildSeek can do for you or Maura's family? Answer: the fact that we are having this interview gives great comfort and hope for everyone who loves Maura and in turn wants to bring her home. From day one, it has been apparent that the more Maura's photo as well as her story reaches the public, the more likely it makes the possibility that Maura will come back to us. Everyone is truly thankful for your interest and efforts in doing precisely that, and I personally want ChildSeek to know that your efforts in Maura's case, as well as countless others, are both appreciated as well as productive. Question: if you could get a message to Maura, what would you say to her? Answer: if Maura could hear me now, I would reassure her of what she already knows, that I love her and that I am not giving up, so neither should she. She knows as well as anyone how strong-willed and determined she is, and she should know that everyone who loves her is just as determined and focused on bringing her home as anyone could possibly be. End quote from the guy that never went up there ever again to search for her ever again. Okay. So some responses here. Bill mentioned police released the car without checking for fingerprints. So again, no definitive evidence it was even Maura in the car at that time. Because if somebody else's fingerprints were on that steering wheel, on the door handle, what would that mean? So another interesting point is regarding whether the airbags were cut out of the vehicle. We actually went over this and the black box misconceptions. I'll repeat it real quick here. The black box is, again, this is from technicians that actually worked on these Saturns, specifically these years. The black box recorder records the last events and needs to be reset before recording any new events. So if there was any prior information about starting the car, turning it off, accidents, whatever, if the black box was not reset and we have no way to know whether it was or wasn't, that information is not from February 9th, from the staged accident. That information is from a time previous. Now, since we don't know what's going on in the airbags, I mean, everything's unknown here. So, an astute poster posted this: when Fred got to the car, Friday, February 13th, the airbags were already cut out by then, 100% fact. Since I have a hard time believing that any law enforcement would cut out airbags of a car involving a DWI walkaway, it seems highly likely that they had to have been cut out previously before February 9th. Would also turn the case upside down, in my opinion. So, yeah, that is a major, major curiosity, because, again, if the Saturn was involved in the Patrice Vassi hit and run, and I am not alleging it was or was not, and the airbags did deploy, what does that mean? And if the car was being towed, like some people believe, some people, even investigators who worked on the case early on, believe that the Saturn was being towed, it came off the tow hitch, and then it was staged in some kind of fashion to make it look like it just randomly hit a tree. So that's a curiosity, because obviously towing a car with its airbags cut out is a lot different than driving a car with cut out airbags. So some more posts here regarding what Bill said in this interview. I thought Maura's last communication to Bill was "I love you more, stud" email. Do we know what exactly she said to Bill on the 1 p.m. voicemail she left him? Interesting that he is implying her intention to tell him where she was going when apparently she did no such thing. Ms. Gaggs responded, yes, interesting. There was no 1 p.m. incoming call on Bill's phone records, and no outgoing call on Maura's cell records Monday, February 9th at 1 p.m. There is an outgoing call that Maura dials at 2:18 p.m., which would have been 1:18 Oklahoma time, but at that time, Bill was on the phone with Kate and did not answer Maura's call. Maura's last sequence of calls goes like this for Monday, February 9th. First call of the day is at 12:55 p.m. to Linda Salamone. Second and third calls, 1:13, 1:14 p.m. Maura calls her dorm, presumably to check her voicemail. Fourth call at 2:05 p.m. Maura calls Ghosto. Okay. Fifth call, 2:18 p.m. from Maura to Bill, which he doesn't answer as he's on the phone with Kate Markopoulos. Here's the thing, though. Is this really Maura making the calls with her phone, or is Maura actually with Kate Markopoulos? And Bill is actually talking to Maura, which might possibly be the reason he's ignoring another call, even if it's from Maura's cell phone. Because if presumably, again, depending on what kind of cell phone he had in 2004, I don't know if they had three-way calling easily accessible then, but presumably it would come up that he's receiving another call and he has the option to switch over. Or hang up and answer the other one, whatever the case may be. If he's trying to get in touch with Maura, and he's talking to Kate, and Maura starts calling him, you would think he would tell Kate he would call her back or even hang up immediately in order to answer the call to Maura. Now, if Maura is with Kate and he calls Kate and Maura's there, or he can hear her there or whatever, he might ignore a call, even if it's coming from Maura's cell, if he's talking to Maura. I mean, I don't know. This is kind of weird. Or even if he is talking to Kate and he knows what's going on with Maura and he knows Maura doesn't have her own cell phone, perhaps he might ignore the call as well. I don't know. Final outgoing call on Maura's records are to her cell voicemail at 4:37 p.m. for 4 minutes. Okay. So people obviously are saying perhaps Bill misremembered it innocently. Miss Gags also posted this. The more interesting thing to me is that he didn't answer his girlfriend's call because he was talking to her friend Kate. Remember, this is all supposedly before he even knew she was missing, as he claims to have found out on the 10th around dinner time from Fred. Also, it confirms in April 2004 he had his and Maura's phone records and acknowledges knowing what her last calls were, but never calls the Salamones, whom Maura called in the 9th, or someone using her phone. I'll never understand why, having access to the phone records, he never tried the Salamones. Sharon did 8 to 9 months later. And how many possible answers could there be to that question? And of course, this all goes back to, do we even know if Maura was using her phone or somebody else was? So let's move on to Repulsive Wallaby, possibly the best researcher on the case, moving the case forward. Perhaps Repulsive Wallaby, on their own, are responsible for this case to being closer to solved than it has ever been before. So credit to Repulsive Wallaby here. Came across this really descriptive early article on Maura's disappearance with some interesting smaller details. It would not let me share the direct article link, but you can zoom in for an easier read, so let's go over this article here. Search for woman continues in Haverhill. So, I'm assuming, yeah, this is talking about Fred. He's worried that Maura Murray got into the wrong car after she plowed her black 1996 Saturn into a snowbank on a sharp curve and apparently decided not to stick around until police showed up to investigate the crash. Again, if she was even there. He's worried because police are virtually certain that she left the area in a vehicle. Haverhill Police Chief Jeff Williams said Tuesday there were no tracks in the snow around the crash site, and state police search dog lost Maura Murray's scent quickly. It seems likely she got into a car. It could have been a good guy, it could have been a bad guy, said Fred Murray, who is worried primarily that something as bad happened to his daughter to prevent the normally reliable former West Point cadet from contacting him, her boyfriend, her friends, or any of the people she usually keeps in touch with regularly. 2 days before the North Haverhill accident, Maura Murray had smashed up her father's new car in an accident in Hadley, Massachusetts, not far from the University of Massachusetts campus in Amherst, where she is a junior. Fred Murray said yesterday that he and his daughter's boyfriend, Bill Roush of Marengo, Ohio, as well as her friends and siblings, have been trying to figure out if her stress over the first accident would have been enough to cause her to withdraw $280 from her bank account and tell her employers at an art gallery that she'd be away for a week. Interesting. So, no UMPD, just the art gallery being referenced here. She was upset because of the accident in my car. She felt she had disappointed me, let me down like any kid would. I don't think it was anything serious. He said Maura headed for the North Country because it was familiar territory for her. The family had vacationed for years in Lincoln and Conway, New Hampshire area, he said, and liked to climb 10,000-foot peaks. Asked if there was one special place she might have headed for, her father said yes, in Bartlett. I've checked, nobody's been there, he said. He and his son, Fred Jr., 33, also of Hanson, Mass., have hit all the campgrounds they could find that their family used over the years. They were all locked down and snowed in. Maura's boyfriend, Bill Roush, 23, is an Army lieutenant stationed in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He's in another room at the Wells River Motel. Last night, he dropped in on his parents, Bill and Sharon Roush of Marengo, Ohio, in their room there, and said he's dreading reporting back for duty some 2,000 miles away if Maura hasn't turned up by the weekend. We were just talking about the future the other day, he said during one of the regular phone calls he had with Maura. Though not officially engaged yet, he said it was clear to everyone the couple planned to marry and he was going to get out of the service so that they could start a family. New Hampshire State Police let family members retrieve Maura's belongings from the Saturn. Bill Roush is holding on to her favorite stuffed animal, Joseph, a monkey that she had in the car with her, allegedly. The Roushes said they're doing their best to remain upbeat and positive. Sharon Roush said she thinks often of Elizabeth Smart, the Utah girl who was kidnapped and missing for months before police found her and brought her home. He misses her terribly, she said, of her son. It's strange, but when I see her picture on the television, it's hard to believe we're in the middle of this. Is this just a really bad dream, or is it real? She asked. Fred Murray and his son returned to the motel last night after spending much of the day combing the snowy woods in the White Mountain National Forest not far from the Haverhill site where Maura was last seen. Her father said he followed boot prints over about a half-mile of rugged terrain before he saw a clear enough print to determine that they had been made by boots larger than his daughter's size 8.5 shoes. Murray said his and Roush's family members had, in the past week, papered the area with posters bearing his daughter's photos from central Vermont to Fryeburg, Maine, and searched behind miles of roadside snowbanks. No one could fail to see the missing person notices at the Swiftwater Stage Shop, a log cabin-style convenience store not far from the spot where Maura Murray vanished, allegedly. Owner Winnie Madison has them posted on her front door and at the checkout counter. She said yesterday that the disappearance has been a major topic of conversation among customers. Everyone has an opinion. There just isn't anything concrete. But the more time that goes by, the worse it looks, she said. Meanwhile, yesterday, a school bus driver, Butch Atwood, whose home is within sight of the crash scene, said he was just about to park his bus on that Monday night at about 8 p.m. when he spotted a car nearly sideways on the road. He rushed down to see if he could help. She spun on the curve, she had no lights on, and it was a dark car. I could just about see it. I put my flashlight in the window. She was behind the airbag. All I could see was from her mouth up, Atwood said yesterday as he stood in his driveway and pointed to the accident spot. I yelled in and she said she was okay. She was shaking, as anyone would be if they had just been in an accident. That's an interesting piece of information to add, said 57-year-old Atwood. He described Maura's struggle to squeeze her way out through the driver's door of the car that he said had sustained considerable front-end damage. I told her I was going to run to the house and call the police. She said, no, please don't. I already called AAA. Well, under my breath, I said, that's a lie. You can't make a cell call from here, Atwood said. Cellular reception is poor throughout the area. Despite the young woman's protests, Atwood said he did summon the police, but when he went back outside, she was gone. I guess I was the last one to see her. I heard a couple of cars go by when I was on the phone. But I didn't see her get in a car, and I just don't know which way she went. We're all just dumbfounded by this, Atwood said. A couple of drivers along Route 112 yesterday afternoon got a surprise when they took a curve, then had to hit the brakes quickly as they encountered one tall police chief and two state troopers walking toward them in the roadway. Williams and Lieutenant John Scarinza, the Twin Mountain Troop Commander, plus his second-in-command Sergeant Tom York, examined the crash scene and the surrounding area once again. The Haverhill chief declined to say exactly what the three were doing. But he did say, although there were no new developments yesterday, he was not ready just yet to go along with the fears of the family members that Maura Murray had been the victim of foul play. If any good Samaritan picked her up, please call her. If that's all it is, that person hasn't done anything wrong. She's an adult, and if she wants to be missing, that's fine. We'd just like to know what happened, William said. So, again, Butch Atwood, the least reliable party in this whole thing, is, in this particular article, is assuming that it was Maura that he saw, but also stating that the driver had trouble getting out because of the airbag. So he's claiming the airbag deployed. So that means it was cut out by police randomly. And again, this is was taken to a private garage. I mean, this is unlike any other case out there. So very, very weird. We don't know if it was Maura. Obviously, the Westmans, and this is supported by the transcript, by the police call log, in which the most objective party, theoretically, Rhonda Marsh, who in the transcript clearly states man smoking a cigarette as reported by Faith Westman. Also in the transcript, Butch Atwood stated he hit a pine tree. So that's 2 mentions of a male, 0 mentions of a female by the most objective party, Rhonda Marsh, who's simply typing up what she's hearing in the transcript, assuming that she's not completely incompetent. She would know to type accurately. And I've mentioned this before. Maura, at her time in college, I mean, it's not like in high school she was a lot thinner and not quite, I mean, from a distance in the winter, may possibly have been mistaken for a slender male. But from her most recent photographs, I mean, it seems difficult that someone would mistake her for a male, particularly if her hair was down, because Butch Atwood said her hair was down, and allegedly Maura always wore her hair in a bun. And he said she did not look like the pictures, either because of that or because of something else in other interviews. He also had numerous different stories on how he saw her, whether while he was in the bus, across, or getting... I mean, there's just so much inconsistency with Butch Atwood, the least objective party, where you have the most objective party, Rhonda Marsh, stating that in the transcript quite clearly that it's a man smoking a cigarette. Also, basic common sense would state that if it was a clear female that was out on the road in an accident, the Westmans would come out to assist or investigate, which maybe they did. There were other sources that said that there were multiple people at the scene before the cops got there. So maybe the Westmans did go out, but if they didn't, it would make more sense that if a lone male smoking a cigarette, they might not necessarily, an elderly couple, they might not necessarily walk out to assist if it looks like he's fine and smoking a cigarette. Whereas if it was a lone female not smoking a cigarette, or even if she was smoking, it seems more likely that people would come out to assist, whether the Marats or the Westmans. So a lot of things don't add up. I mean, that's another one of the major assumptions. I did a whole episode on was Maura even the driver, because there's really no evidence that she was, and all of the evidence, all of the testimony from the more objective parties suggests that she was not. And yet all of these Dunning-Kruger goofs put all their blind faith in the least objective party, pretending that Butch Atwood is some infallible god. Also, if there was no airbag, if it was already cut out, then, Butch Atwood would be lying about quite a lot of things. Some comments on this early article here. Police are virtually certain that she left the area in a vehicle. So Betty Cracker here stating that Maura was in Kennedy dorm not far from my residence hall. I graduated in 2003, the year before. However, I still had many friends at UMass. They had a range of thoughts, like she went off to party for a short while. Sadly, UMass is somewhat of a party school, and drinking and drugs are normalized. Ran off with a different guy, got lost in the woods, a lot of the more innocent thinking. Maura lived on the wild side of campus, southwest, as did I. I didn't know that going in. I think there was a sense of invincibility and lack of understanding about danger when we're younger. A lot of kids that age take risks we shake our heads at years later. Also here, there were a few publicized student scandals when I attended, a few suicides, a girl that gave birth secretly in a UMass bathroom and committed infanticide, and a student that died of a cocaine overdose. There were probably a few more, but those stick out. So another possibly critical clue that Repulsive Wallaby brings up here is that Springfield pops up a lot in this case. I've noticed that. I still want to find out what this track team member that Maura called on Saturday evening discussed. She was one of the last people she connected with, and considering this girl's number never appears in her phone logs after that or directly before. Coincidentally, she also looks similar to Maura Murray. Another post here. Yes, this would be interesting. I just had a thought here, but I wonder if Maura intended to have this particular track team member join her and Kate for drinks Saturday night with her father, Fred, at Amherst Brew. In between calling Kate just before 9 p.m. and again shortly after, Maura calls the Springfield number at 8:59 p.m. Huh. Very curious. Repulsive Wallaby writes this. Definitely possible. Interesting that we never hear much about this other girl. Would that mean that Maura was also somewhat close to this girl, much like Kate? I wonder how well Fred remembers those times. Does anyone know if Maura had a sister on the track team? Another post here. Supposedly this track team member did not compete. So she joined the UMass... Okay. So she did not compete before returning. She did not compete in 2003-2004 indoor or outdoor seasons. And Maura was no longer on the track team by the 2003-2004 season. And this other track team and this other girl on the track team didn't compete that year. Perhaps they stayed close friends, or perhaps the link is Kate, who was friends with Maura and possibly the other girl. We don't hear much, if anything, about her. Yeah, I don't recall this other individual being discussed or interviewed anywhere. And if she was also involved in the Phillip Street address or around, I mean, it's quite bizarre. Another post here. How can Butch's sighting be a positive ID when he states he only saw her from the mouth up? Odd. And especially if her hair is down and possibly disheveled, obscuring a lot of her face. I mean, this is the most non-positive ID you can get. And yet a lot of these goofs hallucinate that it's some kind of a definitive ID, ignoring all of the more neutral parties. A solid post here by Cookies is Mids. Butch's story is all over the place. All of the witnesses' stories are. Both Faith and Butch described a man in their 911 calls, so I tend to believe that a man was there. The only stories that are raw are the 911 calls. After that, the witnesses can be tampered with, which is evident to me considering both their stories changed. Another post, exactly. Any statements given by the Westmans, the Atwoods, other than the 911 calls, should be taken with a grain of salt. It's no reflection on their character whatsoever, but if law enforcement directed them to say this, or that during other interviews, they most likely would concede to law enforcement's wishes. Also, if they truly believe they were mistaken, because if they're being gaslit by law enforcement and even Fred Murray, either intentionally or otherwise, into claiming that it had to have been Maura there, so they just assumed they were mistaken, and they didn't see what they actually saw that they reported in the 911 call. And it's just weird. I mean, this is children's level basics of logic and reason, and yet in this case, there are just so many people that just fail to even meet that basic threshold of children's level logic and reason. A post by Maid of Honor here, which is quite astute. I searched now for other articles about Atwood and found on 107.7 blog from the Caledonian Record dated February 20th, 2004, quote, she was still in the car, and I shined the light in her car. No description of her squeezing out or talking over the roof of the car. I'm absorbed in reading over the Westman and Murat interviews. In the two PI interviews with the Westmans, they see and hear activity around the car before Atwood arrives. McDonald interview with Murat notes Maura could not be seen after Atwood left. Does this imply they saw her before? Question mark. Then in the PI interview with the Murats, describe a shadowy figure walking around the vehicle, no mention of the bus. So I'm inferring they saw activity when looking at the entirement of both accounts before Atwood arrives. The Whitewash article doesn't include any activity before Atwood arrives. It also mentions Murat not coming out or even being home. That's curious. Another post here. It is one of the weird inconsistencies for several reasons. First, airbags deflate almost immediately. That's how they work. They inflate in milliseconds, and then the force of the person hitting them causes them to deflate. They're supposed to be essentially an air cushion. Second, in various tellings of the story in the media by Butch, she's standing outside the car or inside the car hidden by the airbags. Oh, plus all early reports say a witness, presumably Butch, said Maura was drunk. He denies saying or thinking that. That said, we can square the circle, sort of. If he drove up and couldn't really see her behind the deflated airbags, she is sitting for part of the conversation, then she gets out and talks to him. But then we're stuck with another weird scenario. Maura just sat there hidden behind airbags for several minutes after her crash. Maybe, I suppose, but Faith saw a man smoking a cigarette before Butch arrived, or maybe a girl on a cell phone, I guess. So she must have been moving around at least a little bit. But that raises a question about Faith Westman's story. Let's say she accepts it could have been a light on a charging cell phone. Everyone agrees that there's no cell service at the Weather Barn corner. If Maura took out the phone to try to make a call, would she really hold it up to her face? There was no service, remember? If she hit dial, the call wouldn't complete. So why put the phone up to her face or somewhere where Faith Westman could see it? And even if she did, how long would she hold a phone with no service to her ear? A few seconds? And what about the airbags? Butch allegedly couldn't see her face, but Faith Westman could see a man smoking a cigarette. These details are why, in my opinion, the timeline is important. For example, as I've mentioned previously, is it possible Butch was at the accident scene before Faith called 911? It would contradict her and the Marats, but could make more sense of the timeline in some sense, while raising other questions such as why did Butch wait so long to call 911? Or even the crazy thought I had that Butch wasn't even driving the bus that night. No one other than Butch places him at the scene. Neighbors saw a school bus. You know who else drives the school bus? Butch's wife. Maybe she has extreme social anxiety or something so that she asked Butch to claim he was the one who spoke to the driver. Could explain why he seemed to hedge on details so often, who knows. That's actually a very interesting scenario. Now, we did talk about his wife possibly being the bus driver, but we didn't talk about it for a more innocent reason, perhaps that, again, if she did have social anxiety at the time or for whatever reason, Butch pretended he was the one in the bus when he wasn't, and that's why the story changes so much. And obviously, she didn't really see. I mean, if Butch's wife saw Maura, or if she saw a man, perhaps she saw a man, and then at that point they were kind of dug in. What are they going to do? So, yeah. Another follow-up post here. Butch spoke to the media fairly often in early reporting as far as I can tell. It's also possible later stories were simply quoting from earlier stories. He retired and moved to Florida several years later. But there's a few puzzling things. He was subjected to at least one lie detector test, as per his wife, and the New Hampshire League of Investigators who spoke to him thought he was lying or hiding something, to the point where John Healy went to Florida to try to speak with him. So basically, both the police and early PIs who spoke to him didn't buy his story. I can only speculate as to why, but my common sense says a few things. 1, the timeline doesn't smell right. 2, Butch is the only person placing Maura in New Hampshire or with the Saturn. 3, he seemingly told Cecil Maura was drunk, then contradicted that to the media. 4, he pulled a kind of expletive move, if we're being honest. According to him, he pulled over, asked if she needed help. She said no, she was going to or had called AAA. He offered to call police. She said no need. So why did he call the cops? To get her into trouble? She asked him not to. For all Butch knew, she had used a neighbor's phone to call for a tow truck, or her cell phone did have service there. There was still in the days when early cell reception varied widely between carriers. Or maybe her friends were in another car and they drove down the street to call for a tow truck. That's an interesting point. He had no idea. So why call the cops when she asked him not to? Even if he didn't think she was drunk, why would he want to potentially her to get a ticket for unsafe operation or failure to maintain a lane or whatever? There was no property damage to anything other than her car. So, unless the story didn't play out as he said he did, I've posted about my angry Butch theory where he's basically annoyed at her for having a black car with no lights on in the middle of the road around a steep curve and acted like a jerk the entire time. Then tried to make himself look better in retellings when he realized what happened and that he could be at least partially at fault for something that had happened to her. Or it could be something else entirely. Another poster posted this: I would never call the cops either. I would have said, you have service? We don't have service around here. Let me call AAA for you. Only in a dire need would I call the cops, but I guess that's just me. Plenty of people call the cops for hardly anything. We had this lady on Facebook who would listen to the scanner and post, someone called the cops because the person was looking at the ground. Kid you not. I mean, yeah, but do people up in near the mountains in New Hampshire? They're usually not as Karen-ish as city folk. Okay, the final theory we're gonna go over. Believe it or not, there was an actual modification for a theory that we haven't discussed before. If Maura really was at the accident scene, but then left, and then Atwood talked to a different girl, and that different girl also left, what does that mean? And let's say Atwood assumed it was Maura, and then later, upon seeing more pictures, again, he said she didn't look like the pictures, whatever, he eventually realized it really wasn't Maura. At that point, is he really going to come forward and say that? Like, what do people expect him to do if it really was an honest mistake? So, an interesting post here by Catarai. When did Maura disappear? 1 to 2 minutes before police arrived. So if it was 7:35, it would be 1 minute, 7:34, 7:35, 2 minutes, or 7:33, between 7:33 and 7:34 p.m. So according to this timeline, if Karen McNamara was on the scene before any police and saw Maura and picked her up, where did Maura go after that? I don't know, but if Witness A saw an abandoned SUV nose to nose with Maura's car, which was also abandoned, if Butch arrived and talked to another girl before police arrived, and then that girl disappeared too. So if Witness A's account is true, there's nobody there, maybe it was Maura, maybe it wasn't, then Butch comes and it's somebody else there. So here's an interesting post by Mary 4 Poaches. I'm coming back to Frank Kelly. A witness returning home from his or her place of employment at Cottage Hospital on Goose Lane stated she/he observed a black Bronco-style police unit with number 1 stenciled on it past her or him, heading with blue lights flashing toward the intersection of Goose Lane and French Pond Road in Swiftwater. Please have a map of this area to follow along as it gets confusing since these routes twist from Haverhill into the Swiftwater portion of the town of Bath and then back into the northern section of Haverhill. Goose Lane and the Cottage Hospital are in Haverhill, then in Bath, where it continues south to southwest back to the Woodsville portion of Haverhill. As the witness drove further up Goose Lane, he or she observed the police unit continue on Goose Lane back towards Swiftwater. As this witness turned off Goose Lane in Bath and onto French Pond Road and the very short distance on French Pond Road to the intersection with Route 112, the Wild Amanusak Road as it's called, almost across from the general store, he or she observed the same unit, number 1, pass her or him at the intersection heading east towards where the Saturn was ultimately located. When the witness came to the corner at the Weathern Barn, he or she saw this police unit nose to nose with the Saturn, but did not see any officers or people around the two vehicles. It is assumed Sergeant Smith was at this point either speaking with the Westmans or down speaking with Mr. Atwood. The witness then continued along Route 112 heading east and flashed his or her high-low beams to oncoming traffic, a universal signal to slow down ahead due to the location of the accident on the sharp curve. This witness's account of what he or she saw that evening supports the postings about an earlier accident where, quote, female left in private vehicle, end quote, which was heard by others over the scanners up in that area. What does this all mean then? It means an officer was responding to a vehicle slid off the road call, but then rather than take the most direct route to the Weathered Barn, the officer went back to Route 10 where it intersects with Goose Lane up in the Woodsville section of Haverhill before turning back around at the corner of the Weathered Barn, Could there have been two separate women sliding off the road into snowbanks that evening within 30 minutes of one another? I doubt it, but it's possible nonetheless. Huh. Yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked out the Mindshock episode on the earlier accident, I actually go over that. There's quite a few ear witnesses on the scanner and other information to support the earlier accident. Now, what that means in relation to whether it is or isn't Maura, I mean, that's still, of course, unknown. So many different scenarios to ponder. I mean, this case really does need to be solved, and solved soon. And I'm, of course, of the opinion that enough information does exist to solve this. There just seems to be certain elements preventing the information from coming to light in order to solve it, and there could also be a bunch of different reasons for that. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast in the Maura Murray series. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.